Hello, everyone. We are pleased to welcome you here in the sunny city of Madrid, where we are hosting this week the European Hydrogen Energy Conference. So first of all, I want to thank the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for hosting this panel today, where we are trying to talk about issues, challenges and opportunities for the partnership between North Africa and Europe to produce and develop and transport green hydrogen with the context of the conflict in Ukraine. So this technology is presented right now by Europe like the new El Dorado, like the solution for its energy independence and also to accelerate the energy transition. So we could see, for example, how last week Iberdrola launched its first and biggest hydrogen plant, green hydrogen plant in Puerto Llano here in Spain. And we can see that this is, the time of hydrogen. So I am really honored today to talk about all of this with our guests. So Nemesio Fernandez Costa, welcome.
Thank you.
So you are the president of Isolux.
I was president.
You were president of Isolux. You are the former general director of Repsol,
Yeah.
and also the former Secretary of State for Energy under the government of José María Aznar.
Yes, it's right.
So welcome to
Thank
this
you.
panel. And we have with us also David Henneberger. So you are the head of the foundation, the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, here in Madrid and in Spain. So thank you for hosting this event. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
So together during the next hour, we will try really to talk about the challenges, the issues, and try to provide answers to all these questions about hydrogen, green hydrogen. Is it the future? Is it or not? What has to be done to have it in a short term, like the energy that will provide to Europe its independency on an energy point of view? So to talk all about this, we will divide the conversation around three main topics, okay? First of all, the technical challenges, all right? Does it make sense to produce it in North Africa, then to transport it, and how to transport it to Europe? The regulatory and the tariff issues, the integration of tariff energies in Europe, at what price will be that energy bought by Europe from North Africa? And then, and finally, we will talk about the politic challenges. Okay, we could see how this last 2 decades, Europe and North Africa went through some sensitive diplomatic challenges. So does it make sense really to replace a dependency from Russia to a dependency from another region of the world? Okay, so if you will, we will start with you, Nemesio, for the technical part of it. Okay. So what is your opinion? What do you think about green hydrogen?
Well, first of all, let me say that hydrogen is part of the solution. But I understand that you use the expression El Dorado. Mm-hmm. This is not the only solution. I think that the key element in energy transition is the electrification of our economies. Mm-hmm. Electricity, for the time being, is something around 20-something% of our final energy consumption, and electricity must reach the level of something around 50%. Mm-hmm. In the remaining 50%, of course, hydrogen has a role to play. Mm-hmm. But with hydrogen, we would need to take into account, for instance, carbon capture, mm-hmm. reforestation, in general terms, carbon sinks, and of course energy efficiency, biofuels, bioenergy in general terms, and even synthetic fuels. All these would be the solution. But of course, hydrogen has an important role to play. Second part, the North African countries are able to produce hydrogen in a cheapest way than here in Europe. The answer is yes. Why? Because of, for instance, solar radiation. Mm-hmm. This is their competitive advantage. I mean that the cost of green hydrogen between brackets is the hydrogen that is produced through electrolysis of water, and you need, for the economy of this type of production, you need to take into account the efficiency of electrolyzers, mm-hmm. the cost of electricity, and the capacity factor. For the cost of electricity and the capacity factor, the Saharan desert is a great advantage. Then all these North African countries can produce hydrogen in a cheapest way. Mm-hmm. How to transport? Of course, an important amount of investment would be needed in order to transform the existing gas infrastructure in order to being able to transport hydrogen. You need to reinforce, in general terms, all these pipelines in order to transport hydrogen.
So is it possible to transport hydrogen through the gas pipeline that are existing right now? Well, there is just two, I think. There is one between Algeria and Spain, another one from Tunisia toward
there is
Italy.
The origin is Algeria, three pipelines, one through Morocco to Spain, mm-hmm. one straight from Algeria to Spain, and the third one through Tunisia to Italy.
Yes.
And also there is a pipeline from Libya to Italy.
So hydrogen can be transported through these gas pipelines?
Yes, provided that you make huge investments.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
On general terms, I'm talking that the cost of per kilometer of gas line is in the range of 300,000 euros, and the cost for hydrogen is 1 million.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
But provided that this investment is made, from technical point of view, you can do it. Of course, you have another option, is to transform this hydrogen into ammonia. Mm-hmm. And to transport this ammonia to Europe. And you can reverse the industrial process here in Europe. Ammonia is nitrogen plus hydrogen, mm-hmm. has no carbon at all, and then you can split again nitrogen and hydrogen. And even ammonia can be used for fuel for maritime transport. Okay. Then, from technical point of view, it's feasible, mm-hmm. and there have these countries, on broad terms, they have a competitive advantage, which is the solar radiation.
Yes, and also wind.
And also
there are a
wind.
lot of resources.
But wind, it's more
intermittent.
More local, and must be more locally analyzed.
Okay.
For instance, here in Spain, we have areas in which we have a very big wind resource. For instance, in the Gibraltar Strait, and of course in the Morocco area, they will have some the same area. But in other parts, in the desert, for instance, there is no so wind. Or so. Then wind, we cannot talk in general terms. You need a special local analysis of the wind resources that you have in a certain place.
All right, thank you. You have mentioned something very important, which is to finance this transition or this new technology to make it competitive. We can see how a lot of governments in Europe, the European Union itself, but also some specific countries are really present in North Africa, mainly in Morocco and Tunisia, trying to promote the production of green hydrogen. Okay, I'm coming also from the international cooperation, and I can see how the EU and how, for example, USAID are putting a lot of money to help these countries to develop this technology. Okay, given all these investments and this willingness to develop that technology in North Africa with money coming from Occident and mainly from Europe, what are your expectations to have this technology being competitive?
I think are imminent political tasks also related to that, because when we look at the Desert Tech project, the famous Desert Tech project which failed, which were not failing basically because of a lack of investment, but because of political risks on the one side and also political preoccupations on the southern shore on the other side, because we also have to take into consideration that the northern Africa before COVID and now with the war in Ukraine at different rates, but was growing significantly economically. So they are also very much worried about their own energy security. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about producing green hydrogen now with renewable energy in North Africa, and we don't take into consideration the energy demand that these countries have themselves, there can also be a political risk that these projects don't go forward because they really need also the energy. No,
they need to find a win-win situation.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, it is also important to make sure that human rights are respected mm-hmm. from a political point of view, also to generate support in the local population for these kind of projects. Huge solar plants require expropriation. We need to make sure that the local population is remunerated, compensated for that, for instance. So we have to take a political look as well at the issue and not just a investment look. I think the money is there. Just a few days ago, the Netherlands had another green hydrogen agreement with Morocco. Siemens is investing billions in Egypt, Norwegian companies as well. Total Energy from France is invested in Northern Africa with billions of dollars to build clean hydrogen plants. So the investment is really not the problem, but we have to make sure that the political side is also being taken care of.
Yes, but there is also a challenge about tariffs. I mean, yes, you need to make sure that when you promote a new technology in this region, you have to secure how it is developed. But also, I think that there is a problem, an issue a challenge that has to be overcome, is the integration of tariffs. At what price we are going really to buy this energy to North Africa? Is there something that has been done at this respect?
Well, I think that we are talking about free market. Mm-hmm. I mean, from technical point of view, there is a possibility to produce hydrogen in Northern Africa, but this hydrogen will have to compete, for instance, with hydrogen produced here in Europe, mm-hmm. because we are talking about green hydrogen, but also you have blue hydrogen that is produced based on natural gas plus carbon capture, and perhaps it's cheaper to introduce this carbon capture technology than to reinforce all the gas lines coming from the south to Europe. Then there is some sort of analysis. Also, you have, for instance, turquoise hydrogen. Turquoise hydrogen is not well developed, but is based on pyrolysis. Pyrolysis, the advantage is that they use as a chemical process electricity as a raw material, and the carbon capture is solid. Okay. Then you avoid any type of emissions, and even you avoid the cost of sequestration of the CO2 or a reutilization of the CO2. Okay. Then, of course, you can invest in produce green hydrogen in Northern Africa with the hope that your production will be competitive. But of course, you have your pencil and make your numbers, because at the end of the day, this will be a free market.
Yes, but when we talk about the free market, I mean, when you transport the hydrogen from North Africa, for instance, from Tunisia, for example, or from Morocco, you take it to Italy or to Spain through the gas pipeline. When these countries are going to receive that energy, are you going to sell it to these countries, or it has to be transported and sold in each of the destination countries? Sorry.
Well, again, you have to make the economic analysis. I mean, if you have to reinforce all the gas lines coming from Italy to northern Germany, perhaps it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
The other alternative, for instance, this is the reason why I mentioned, you can transform this hydrogen into ammonia and load it into a ship and transport to the northern part of Europe.
So it's not green hydrogen?
Yes, it's green hydrogen. It's green hydrogen. You produce with renewables, you produce the electricity. With this electricity, you split hydrogen and oxygen from water. This is green hydrogen, and this green hydrogen is used to produce ammonia, which is nitrogen plus hydrogen. And this ammonia can be transported by ship.
Yes, but the ship will use
the
carbon.
ship can use this same ammonia as fuel.
Great.
For instance, all the LNG cargos, right now they use the LNG that they are transporting, they use it as fuel also.
All right. So in a perfect world, could we imagine that to transform hydrogen from water, to get hydrogen from water, to get that water from the sea, we can see with the climate change that the level of the seas are growing. So can we imagine that we will resolve also this problem?
With salted water, you have problems with electrolysis.
Yeah.
Then you have to, first of all, to transform this salt water into clean water or normal water through an
desalination process.
Desalination process.
So it will increase the cost.
It will increase the cost.
Okay. Because I saw, like a couple of weeks ago, the experience of an entrepreneur that he's an engineer. He built a ship, and he did twice the turn of the world with his ship, and he was transforming water from the sea, desalinization, then electrolysis, and then having energy, and he was...
From technical point of view, there is no difficulty. The problem is money.
So we can imagine.
You can imagine, but at the end of the day, the free market economy is based on cost.
Yeah.
And the most competitive way of producing hydrogen will be the most used way and the leading market factor.
All right. Let's get to the political challenges. I think that costs are always overcome with time, with willingness, with political willingness. But at the same time, the political challenges, I think, are maybe the most challenging problems. Okay? As I mentioned beginning this conversation, we could see how some countries of North Africa had sensitive relationships with other countries of the EU. Okay? I will not mention specific problems to not make it personal, but these problems happened. So, what do you think, David, about how to manage this? Does it really make sense to replace a dependency from Russia for having a dependency from North Africa, even if it's part of the solution? We will not depend on a short-term basis. The willingness is not to depend totally on hydrogen. But what is your opinion about this?
Well, first of all, I think if there's one positive aspect about this terrible war in Ukraine in geostrategic terms is that strategy is really back on the table. Politicians across Europe and across the world are now thinking strategically about their foreign policy, how is that correlated to their energy policy, and what do they need to secure energy security at an acceptable cost for decades to come. We talked about the cost of hydrogen production and what that does mean for the company on a microeconomic level. But we see now with the war in Ukraine that the macroeconomic costs in the long run can be much higher than we assumed, And so that needs to be taken into the consideration if you look at it from a macroeconomic perspective in the long run. Having said that, I think the buzzword here, and this is what we need to achieve, is diversification.
Yeah.
You know, what we basically were doing in the last couple of years, we're relying with our retirement scheme on crypto money,
yeah.
on crypto money, or on a single company like Lehman Brothers. You know. Mm-hmm. So this is what we did basically wrong. Apart from the specific problems with Russia, you cannot rely to that extent on one single provider. Mm-hmm. Nobody would do that with their portfolio in their bank account. Yeah. You know. So I think this is the overarching task that we now have, and I think in the long run or in the medium run we will be completely independent from Russian energy for decades to come, because this has really fundamentally changed our relations with Russia now for decades to come. On the other hand, I mean, I know there's a lot of, I'm representing a German foundation, and there's a lot of critique on still relying on Russian energy to some extent. But we are also making a lot of progress. I just want to give you a few numbers. Mm-hmm. Before the war, energy imports from Russia to Germany made up 55% of our gas imports. We are now at 35%, just within a few weeks. Mm-hmm. Carbon imports from 50% to 8%, and oil from 35% to 12.5%, just before the war to today. So these are enormous reductions of the energy dependency from Russia. It is not enough. Mm-hmm. Everybody's working hard to get that to zero as soon as possible, but we need to be smart about this. On the other hand, it's also a geopolitical fact that most of the fossil fuel reserves that we still will rely on for a few years, as quick as we transform, we still will rely on fossil fuels to some extent. Apart from the US, apart from Norway, and a few other countries, the Netherlands, we still rely to a large extent on countries which are not fully democratic. We have to live with that, and this is like a fact. Our green energy economics minister, Habeck, had to travel to Qatar to make a deal about gas deals, which he publicly said was really difficult for him also on a personal level, but it's a necessary thing to do. So I think the dependency on non-democratic regimes will go on for a while. On the other hand, we also have to think of new ways and get back into discussions that we don't like, especially in Germany. The nuclear debate might be up on the table again, although the nuclear debate is a little bit like the toros here in Spain. No, it's so emotionally you can't win the debate. It's really getting really emotional really quick. On the other hand, we have shale gas reserves in Germany of 2.9 trillion cubic meters. That would be enough for hundreds of years to supply Germans with gas, with natural gas. And Germans also don't like shale gas, no, because of the ecological consequences. And rightly so, but we need to get into the debates and also start thinking about these options. One more point. When we talk about this diversification and the dependency, we also, as Democrats and democratic societies, we need to think about the social implications of a too quick change from fossil fuels to renewables, in the sense that it will make life more expensive. The war makes our lives more expensive. The energy prices are skyrocketing, and through the wage price spiral, mm-hmm. This economic concept. Mm-hmm. If you have higher inflation, you also have higher wages directly through the labor contracts, or through the labor unions coordinating themselves to get better contracts in the future. We could get even more inflation in the future, and this obviously creates a huge social challenge in our societies. This is why governments across Europe allow subsidizing fuel, which is also not ideal from an ecological perspective. But we need to make sure that the social impact will be as minimal as possible, because otherwise we have the far right and the far left rising again, some of them close friends with Russia, And this is certainly not what we want to have in this geopolitical environment. So it's all very complex, but I think diversification is key. We won't rely exclusively on energy imports from democratic countries alone in the years to come, and we have to live with that.
Thank you. You mentioned something interesting about nuclear, okay, energy. I saw recently that there is like a new technology, to build smaller plants of 300 or 400 giga. It's cheaper. There is less risks, technical risks for the populations, and it generates less also contamination. So is it within this diversification? I know that we are talking about green hydrogen, but in the context of a diversification of an energy mix, do you think, Nemesio, that these small plants, nuclear small plants, could be also part of the solution?
Small and big. I mean that according to International Energy Agency, in his net zero scenario for 2050, more nuclear energy is needed in order to reach such a goal. Second, in the International Panel of Climate Change that builds up 80, 90 different models, and in all the models that cope with the Paris Agreement, I mean less than 2 degrees centigrade of warming effect before the end of this century, in all these type of models, the weight of nuclear energy is bigger than today. Then nuclear energy is needed. Then these modular reactors up to 200 mega, 2 giga more or less, is something that everybody is working on it. But of course, all these nuclear facilities need to be licensed by the different regulatory bodies, and it's not easy. But it's a possibility because if you produce modular reactors, they can be cheap. Because the key problem for nuclear is their cost.
Yes.
And then we are talking about something in the range for a new facility, something in the range of 100 euros per megawatt hour, while solar is in the range of 30s, and wind is in the range of 35, 40. Then this is the cost difference between renewables or nuclear. But nuclear is needed. And even you can produce hydrogen with nuclear. Is so-called yellow hydrogen. Remember that for hydrogen, the raw material is electricity.
Yes.
And you can produce electricity in different ways.
Yes.
And the capacity factor is of the utmost importance in order to reduce the cost of hydrogen at the end.
Thank you, Nemesio. I was mentioning these small reactors, and sorry, it was megawatts, 200, 300 megawatts, not gigawatts, because it's cheaper to put in place, it's more competitive, and it's enough on a regional point of view, I mean, to produce energy for the populations. And for the industry, it's a more...
and the key point is that in electricity terms, you need a load factor. I mean, because renewables are intermittent. Although you can invest a huge amount of money in the storage of electricity, at the end of the day, to have a load factor that supplies the base needs of any region, country, or part of country, it's very important. For the time being, we are thinking in gas, natural gas, but it's fossil fuels. For the future, perhaps nuclear has a role to play. Anyway, the problem with nuclear is cost, again. But let me say that the key point talking about energy transition, or the two key points talking about energy transition, first of all, is transition. From 2022 to 2050, there is a pathway that we have to go through, but it's not from now. You have to delete all investment in fossil fuels, because at the end of the day, the price of fossil fuels will climb to the heights never seen before. And the second is that The objective of energy transition is to reduce CO2 emissions or greenhouse gases emissions. If you at the same time try to avoid fracking, to avoid reforestation, to avoid anything, at the end of the day you won't find a solution. Then there is one objective and all other objectives but must be submitted to the main objective, which is to reduce the greenhouse gases emissions.
Absolutely. And this is a race. I mean, this is the race against climate change. This is a race against dependency from other countries. So do you think that we will win this race? Do you see it like something in a short-term basis? Or when you talk about all this process, do you think really that in 2050 we will have a zero carbon energy production?
First of all, net zero.
Net zero, okay.
Net zero is not zero. Net zero is that we will have some emissions and we will have some carbon sinks, and the balance will be zero. Then it's important to mention that we would need to invest in carbon capture, reforestation, and in general terms in carbon sinks in order to balance, because we cannot keep our industry without zero emissions. Then we can reach it. We can reach this net zero in 2050, but the key point is the fine-tuning. For instance, here in Spain, we have this, or in Germany, Germany has decided to close their nuclear. Then they are relying on coal. 30% of German electricity is produced by coal nowadays. In Spain, it's less than 5%. And gas, which is also a fossil fuel. Then why to close all the nuclear reactors? I'm not saying that we need to build more, but if we have to maintain as far as we can, or as far as the regulatory body wants, give their permit to work to these facilities. But this is important to reduce the fine-tuning, because we would need diesel, we would need gasoline, we would need gas for the coming years. And if we don't invest in this type of production, at the end of the day, the prices will go up. And if you want, for the sake of energy transition, high cost of fossil fuels can be considered as good. But the counterpart is high inflation. And with high inflation, central bank, high interest rates, and high interest rates is the stop of an economy. Then we need to fine-tune in all these things and taking into account the idea of transition. We have 28 years to reach this objective. It's a reachable objective, but take time and look for this fine-tuning.
And going back to the relationship between, and this partnership between North Africa and Europe about green hydrogen. I know that the foundation has offices in North Africa. What is your perception about this win-win situation that has to happen to realize this partnership? Do you see that there is a general acceptance? I mean, to go through all this process, because it will cost money, not only from Europe to help these countries to produce and to develop this energy, but also you will need some skills there in Northern Africa. I mean, to run these plants and to maintain. And what is your perception? Are the dialogue positive, or do you think that we still have to overcome some challenges?
Well, I think there are different aspects to it. I think, first of all, continuing a little bit Nemesio thought, I think energy policy is highly strategic. It needs to be tackled medium and long term. It can't be affected by either change of democratic governments in our countries, nor by regime changes or presidential changes in other countries. There needs to be an assurance for any partner who trades with energy or trades energy with another partner that the long-term strategy is a raison d'etat.
Raison d'etat, okay.
And given that, and this is a big change in the global energy landscape now, that the Russian war has really created a lot of insecurity and has destroyed that raison d'etat, basically. We need to build the confidence on both sides of the Mediterranean that we will continue our investment, for instance, taking into account the demands and requirements from the other countries, from the producing countries, in terms of energy security for their industry, for their growing economy, what I was talking about earlier before. And we need to be sure that the investments, because this is huge sunk costs, huge sunk investments for private companies who invest in these hydrogen plants, for instance, that these investments are secure for decades to come, whatever happens politically in these countries. I think we are not starting from a bad point. I think there is a lot of confidence in bilateral relations between Europe and Northern Africa, for instance. Algeria, even in political crisis, has up to date always delivered and has been a reliable partner for Europe. Italy just signed a new deal with them, which is a good sign. So there seems to be a lot of confidence in the market and in politics as well. So I think we are starting from a good point. And after diplomatically difficult times also, I think it's fair to say, we just need to get more in contact with each other. We need to travel more. We need to see our counterparts, talk about the perspectives, and be realistic also about our expectations, because we cannot use, and this is something that I want to underline as well, we cannot use our energy policy where we are so dependent and where we are so weak to some extent because it will take, this is not even a matter of decades, I think, until Europe will be completely self-reliant in terms of energy. This will not happen very, very soon. Even with climate change and Hamburg, my hometown, becoming more sunny. So we need to be realistic, and we shouldn't connect different policy fields with energy, because then it becomes so political, then it becomes a continuous matter of conflict between, or discussions and debates, and potential for extortion from both sides. This is not a good environment for the long-term energy cooperation that we were talking about earlier. So I think we're starting from a fairly good point. We need to work on leveling out the smaller differences of the past, of the recent past, and then I think we are in good terms, because also we talk about energy today, but if you look, for instance, of investments in the automotive sector in Northern Africa, there have been massive investments in recent years. Nobody's complaining about anything. It is working. So yeah.
So you really trust that North Africa is more reliable than other countries?
At least I have no reason to doubt. Yeah. However, I also want to go back to the buzzword of diversification. We should also not rely just on one or two countries in North Africa now for our hydrogen production, but should see what we can do in Europe. I mean, Spain itself is a very sunny place. I think Spain has also not yet reached its full potential for solar power creation and clean hydrogen production. So there's a lot of other opportunities that we should think of as well. But I think they're a reliable partner in general terms, yes.
So I think that we can conclude that the solution is the diversification, not to depend on one technology, but that green hydrogen has its place in the energy mix to get to the net carbon zero situation.
Hydrogen has a role to play.
Yeah.
And hydrogen without emissions can be blue, can be green, can be turquoise, or can be other type of hydrogen. But hydrogen, no doubt, has an important role to play.
And something that is not totally clear in my mind, does it really make sense to produce so far from Europe and then to transport? I mean, I think that, as I mentioned before, Iberdrola just launched a huge green hydrogen plant in Puerto Llano last week. Does it really make sense to produce so far from where it will be consumed?
But take into account, for instance, in Spain we have normally 2,000 hours of sun every year. If you find a place where you can find 4,000 hours a year, the amount of electricity, the cost of electricity...
Then it makes sense.
Then you have to compare.
Yeah.
You have, I told you before, you have to sharpen your pencil and make your numbers. And it depends on the number of hours, the capacity of electrolyzers, and of course, there is no natural resource. I mean, oil in Spain, we have no oil, we haven't oil. And in the case of hydrogen, we will have hydrogen, we will produce hydrogen, but perhaps we need to complete our production in the future with some amount of hydrogen imported from other countries. But in terms of balance of trade, I think that our position would be better than today, in which we have no fossil fuels resources.
Great.
I think also that
yes?
talking about the macroeconomic costs again, I mean, it's hard for me as a liberal to say that, but we pay huge amounts of subsidies to agricultures every year in the EU, and I think it's too much, but I wouldn't reduce it to zero, because we need farming in Europe, in our countries, no? Because we need to be self-reliant in terms of food production. And the same is true to some extent for energy. So if there are ways to support local energy producers in Europe so that they produce some of the energy that we consume in Europe and not in other countries, to be at least self-dependent to some greater extent than before, I would be open to discuss it, because the macroeconomic cost in the long run can be much greater, as we are seeing now with Russia.
There is another solution. You integrate North Africa and Europe, and then
yeah, that was not a bad idea. That was the idea in '95.
That's the point, because with the ETS, the European trading system of CO2 rights, at the end of the day, there is a potential source of difficulties, of political difficulties between Northern Africa and Europe. For instance, now Morocco is producing electricity by coal, and from time to time they export some electricity to Spain, but we are deleting coal as a way of producing electricity. Then in the future, the maritime transport will be subject to this ETS, and the penalty or the number of rights, of CO2 rights that you will need, will depend on the distance of your shipment. For instance, from China to Europe, you will have to pay a small amount, not a small amount. But if you go from China to Tanger in the northern coast of Morocco, and from Tanger to Europe, you pay a very small amount. But Algeciras harbor, which is one of the most important in Europe and in Spain, will disappear, because Tanger will absorb all their competitiveness because of these CO2 rights. Then if we have to avoid political difficulties in the future, I think that the integration in the European CO2 market will be a recommendation from Northern Africa, although if I am part of the government, I will delay this till 2050.
All right. So thank you both for your inputs. I think that we have a clearer idea about opportunities, challenges, when we talk about green hydrogen or hydrogen in general, and diversification of energy sources for resources for Europe. Let me give the field to the questions that we have received from our audience on internet. So let's start with the first question. Which of the renewable energies currently used has the least environmental impact? In particular, how polluting is hydrogen? I think that the second question, we have more or less responded to it. But is there a renewable energy that is less contaminating than other?
I would prefer to say that provided that there is no CO2 emissions, all are green energies.
All right.
No more than that.
Okay.
I wouldn't dare to argue with Nemesio.
No, I will not. I will definitely not. So, regarding the second part of the question, is in particular how polluting is hydrogen, I think that we have responded to that. It depends on green, brown, or blue, or yellow green hydrogen. So, second question, is it realistic to think that at some point there will be an energy policy with united tariffs in the EU?
Tariff is border tariff or is taxes?
I think it's border.
Yes,
I think it's meant to be border. No? Huh?
This is how I would understand it as well.
Yeah. Frankly speaking, I'm against the carbon border tax policy. I would ask for going to tariff, to the custom tariffs. We have a very well-structured custom tariff, and I will put a carbon border tax adjustment using these custom tariffs, not the tax adjustment that is going to be approved by the European Union. At the end of the day, we are risking a carbon leakage, which is to move several and important industries from Europe to other parts of the world. And one of the conclusions of the pandemic is that we need to reinforce our industrial structure here in Europe. Because at the beginning of the pandemic, we discovered that we have no mask production in Europe. And at the end of the pandemic, we discovered that we have no chips production in Europe. Then we need to reinforce this, and then to take care of this carbon leakage is of the utmost importance from my point of view.
It's interesting how the pandemic has really changed the liberal point of view about international exchanges. No, I mean I'm not taking a political part in this conversation, but it's interesting how we have moved from promoting massive and international commerce and markets. And then with the pandemic now, the same people are saying we have to be independent, we have to produce in our countries, we have to be totally independent. So do you think that this change or this move will happen again with the crisis that we will be living, or when the pandemic will be forgotten, when Russia, the problem in the conflict in Ukraine will be resolved, that we will go back again for the free market?
Yeah, I think it's not an either-or question. It's like, I think we won't get back to the same optimism about globalization solving all of our problems and putting the risk aside. This probably too optimistic view at it won't come back. But the general idea of free trade and commerce is still the right one. I would strongly defend the idea, and the idea that we also were discussing at the beginning of the pandemic when we didn't have any mass production was, for one part, having relocate production to Europe in that case, which is important, but also the concept of nearshoring, no? And again, the buzzword of diversification. It is not good to rely on one partner or on one trading partner, in this case China, for a lot of important products that we need. No? So also nearshoring, the automotive industry is doing that in Northern Africa, for instance, is another option. So I wouldn't argue against free trade as such, but smarter free trade and more intelligent free trade in terms of a strategic medium to long-term approach. No? On the other hand, we have to say the economic exactly between the West and China is to some extent also very helpful today, because they rely so much on the trade with us that they wouldn't risk to get into full support for Russia now, because they would face the same similar sanctions like Russia is facing. If the US in particular would have the idea that they were like circumventing the sanctions on Russia by doing that. So it's also not too, the general concept of, or the idea, there's this idea now that nations who trade with each other go less on war with each other. I think in general terms it's still correct. The case of Russia is a particular one, because they rely on a very particular product. No, they're the only thing that produces is fossil fuels, basically. So this is not really like an interconnected trading relation in the classical sense of the term. And so I would argue, yes, we won't be that naive about globalization anymore, but the idea and the comparative cost advantages and so on and so forth will still play a key role. And it is not bad. Again, the China interconnection with the West is not bad in the current situation.
All right, thank you. Let's get to the third question. So could the transition to renewables be an opportunity for the Mediterranean energy sector to establish itself as a world leader in the region? Who wants to get that one?
I can take it. I don't like this world leadership.
Yeah.
I think that we have to look for efficiency. We have to produce in a very efficient manner the energy that we would need. And that's the key point, because at the end of the day, this will drive to more competitiveness of our industry and our economy. And this is the key point. World leadership, well, we can be a world leadership in something, but at the end of the day, the key point is efficiency, and energy as a raw material, as a basic raw material, need to be sold in the cheapest manner.
Thank you.
That's the point.
David, you want to add something?
No, I totally agree with Nemesio. I would just say that it is, I don't like the term world leader either, but it is the current geopolitical situation provides an opportunity to put the region back on the map and to talk about more positive cooperation in the future. And this is also something that the Mediterranean as a region needs, to talk more about the opportunities and less about the conflicts and problems that we face.
I think this is a very good way to end this discussion, a very positive one. So I wanted to thank you both. I think really, I'm talking for myself, I really learned a lot. My perception of hydrogen and green hydrogen is better right now than before this conversation. I hope that this is the case of all the people that has followed this panel discussion with us today. I want to thank you all, to thank the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for this opportunity. I want to thank you, Nemesio. It's always a pleasure. It's not the first time we have a conversation about renewables in this region of the world, so it's always a pleasure to talk about these topics with you.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone. Goodbye.